Greetings, it's McKee here with our next week in Seminar Saturdays. Today's paper is about collusion between companies and something that can encourage this to happen. The paper is called Collusion Through Common Leadership, and it's by Alejandro Herrera-Caicedo, Jessica Jeffers, and Elena Prager. Especially Alejandro, I probably mangled your name, so my apologies. And my apologies if I mangled anyone else's name. This was a paper presented at WFA in 2025. So this is a working paper. It's actually probably more preliminary than some of the other WFA papers I've been presenting this semester. But it's a very interesting topic and more of one that's kind of back to regular sort of corporate finance, which is my wheelhouse. So common leadership is also often called interlocking board members. And the idea for common leadership is that we have two companies, and those companies both have hired the same person to work in a very important role for the company. So interlocking board member is a specific sort of subset of this, where one company has this person as their one of their board of directors, and the other company also has that same person as on their board of directors. But you could also have, say, like someone's a CEO of a company, and then they're also a board member for a different company. Now, there are limits on how much you can do this as a company because of antitrust regulations and laws. If you have too many of the same people on the same companies, then you're treated as like you're colluding, and that's illegal. That's market manipulation, and so you're not supposed to do that. However, it does end up happening. One reason for that is the pool of potential board of directors is quite small. There's not a lot of people who have the qualifications, the background to actually be a board member. So some overlap is sort of inevitably going to happen, because who's the best possible person to be on your board? Well, someone who has executive experience in managing a really large company, because they will know how it works and kind of they'll be able to see signs that the CEO of your company is doing a bad job or doing things that are a little bit shady. Well, you're a CEO of a different company and you can also be a board member. So according to the authors, about 1/3 of public companies have some type of common leadership with another company. Often it's in the same industry. Again, this makes a lot of sense. If I have executive experience in, at say Pepsi, and I'm then a great candidate to be a board member for another soft drink company because I have great knowledge in that specific area. So the question that the paper is not answering at a very high level is, but one we care about a lot is this common leadership bad? Because there's potential good things, there's also potential bad things. One of the main downsides and the reason that there are laws, regulations restricting this is because it makes collusion between companies easier. If you are the same person putting the same people in charge of these different companies that are supposed to be competing against each other, well, they're more likely to collude because the same person is running each company. On the other hand, they might be the best person for the job, and maybe they're able to run multiple companies or play an important role in multiple companies and still do a good job. There are indeed exceptional people like that. And they can innocently be sharing information with each other, be learning from the companies, applying techniques. There are innocent synergies from this, in addition to just having good people working multiple jobs. This paper is all about the downside and basically using some evidence of collusion to say, yep, if there's common leadership, there's going to be more collusion, as one might expect. So they are looking at, does collusion measurably increase when you have common leadership? And this is a tough question because it's kind of hard to find direct evidence when something is illegal. It's not like the company's going to be walking around telling everyone, yes, we are colluding with our competitors, because that's kind of admitting to a serious crime, and people tend to not do that. And so the problem is, like, if we find a correlation, also is that, well, was it common leadership that caused the companies to collude, Or is it that companies that are interested in doing some collusion are going to be attracting the same type of person, and in this case, the exact same person? So we don't know what's causing the collusion. Is the common leadership causing the collusion, or the desire to collude causing the common leadership? The empirical setting for this paper is interesting, although I think they are going to have some trouble because they don't really have a great exogenous shock here. But in the early 2000s, a whole bunch of tech companies in Silicon Valley made agreements with each other to, well, collude in a specific way, which is to avoid poaching their employees. So, two tech companies sit down, have a secret agreement, and yeah, we're not going to like cold call each other's employees and try to hire them away. There was a whole bunch of lawsuits that unsealed evidence of collusion, and so we know for sure that these guys were doing the collusion because they were taken to court and there was discovery and there's publicly available documentation that shows, yeah, they agreed to collude. However, there was no random shock to common leadership. So we don't the common leadership was sort of endogenous. It existed. There was common leadership between these tech companies, but there's not like there's an increase in common leadership and then we see this collusion. There's not a clear link like that. So the authors spend a lot of time ruling out alternative explanations, but the problem with doing that is like you can never really cover every possible problem. One way that I've seen people try to address this particular type of it's kind of basically a question about leadership is looking at deaths. So you have a new CEO because your old CEO died. You probably, whatever you're looking at is probably not like going to cause the CEOs to commit suicide or something like that, or cause the CEO to die of a heart attack, or just whatever ailment ended up ending the life, unfortunately, of your previous executive. And so because death is somewhat random, or at least hopefully unrelated to the thing you're looking at, then you can see some causality there. But they might have their sample's not large. There were dozens of companies that all were caught colluding at the same time. So there's a kind of a large enough group of companies you can do some statistical analysis, but not many of them are going to have, like, deaths are relatively rare for executives and things like that. So it's unlikely that they have enough death happening to these common leadership companies that they would actually have enough companies to actually look at things. All right, so what data are they getting? Well, they have the court documents, and so they can create firm pairs between companies that have a no poaching agreement, and because the federal law enforcement, once they actually caught wind of this collusion, they investigated pretty significantly. They also can make firm pairs of companies that had a collusion agreement with one company, but we know they didn't have a collusion agreement with the other company. We knew when we're pretty confident because like that, every company that was caught colluding had very vigorous investigation, and so additional collusion agreements were discovered thanks to that investigation. They use common leadership from Board X, very common database of board members. The board is for the board of directors, as well as executives. The X is for the executives. Between 2000 and 2019, 2009 is when that collusion was caught, and the collusion was happening pre-2009. They include board of directors, they include CEO, that is super standard, but they're also including the other C-suite executives, and they include vice presidents if the vice president was in technical or human resources, because the people that are potentially not getting poached because of this collusion are software engineers. And they also have some data from LinkedIn about labor market competition using overlap from employment. So the idea here, and I actually have a paper that I've done that also uses LinkedIn data using job movements from employees, but although in a different context, is, well, we can look and see how many people say on their public LinkedIn profile, oh yeah, I used to work at Google, now I'm working at Microsoft. And they can say, they can count a number of people who are shifting between these two companies and saying, yes, they are competing for the same people. Or if there's no one who's moving between the two companies, there's no connections between those companies, they're not competing with each other. So their empirical strategy is a difference in difference approach where they're comparing within that sample of firms who were all caught colluding. Some of the firm pairs, 60 of them, had an actual collusion agreement, and there's 920 firm pairs where that firm did have a collusion agreement with a different company, but not with the company that they're being paired with. Which is a good, like this is good for them. This is a good setting. They also do some time differences within the colluding pairs in case there's like false negatives, although hopefully there aren't any because like the investigation was apparently very thorough. That's what they were told by law enforcement. Perhaps law enforcement has a slight bias in being more confident than warranted, but they take that as given, and it's hard to second guess really well if this was true or not. Like none of us are law enforcement experts. So that's their comparison. They're comparing 60 collusion firms with 9 or 20 non-colluding pairs. And what they find is that indeed, if the company pair has common leadership, common ownership is a different thing, they are more likely to have a collusion agreement. So if you look at the very top row here, it's 0.135, and we have those stars there. So the common leadership is they're more likely to have an agreement. A lot of the other things like common ownership, being in the same industry, they have all sorts of different measures of for the same industry. Those things don't seem to matter, and the one thing that does matter is the labor market overlap. So it's not that they have the same operations, it's that they're trying to hire the same people. And you might think that those two are identical, but in reality, they're not actually identical. If you think about it more carefully, there's a lot of jobs that are good for or are needed for every industry or multiple industries, and so there might be a labor market overlap, but the industry is not going to look the same. And when they kind of restrict the sample some more and look across time, nothing changes. It's still common leadership is still increasing the probability that there is a collusion agreement between these companies. And next they look at, is there common leadership characteristics that increase or decrease collusion? Because the type of common leadership could matter here, right? Like maybe if you have two members on the board versus an executive and a board member, or a hiring manager and another who's working as a hiring manager but for two different companies, maybe that's more likely or less likely. The idea they're thinking is like board of directors are going to have less influence on hiring policy, and actual executives will. And indeed, that's kind of what they found. So if there's any leader, they find that regular effect at 0.119 is kind of the same result they had before. But if they look only at board members, the effect almost disappears. If they look only at ones that had an executive person, one of the person who's linking these companies had an executive role, at least one company, it's a stronger effect, a little bit larger, and still kind of similar statistical significance. So it seems like, yes, if you had the executive, that mattered in terms of increasing the likelihood that you're going to have this collusion agreement. And there's a whole battery of robustness tests they're doing to try and rule out various potential causality issues, but they're kind of not super interesting, I don't think. And so I'm going to skip them. And we are now done. So collusion, both anecdotally, because they actually like cite some of the court filings, and according to the court filings, like the two companies sort of like they met and said, yeah, let's stop colluding. And they call each other up like, hey guys, can we stop poaching our employees, please? We'll not poach yours too. And having a point person on both companies would made it more likely. And this was possibly more likely when you have one person that also has an executive position. It's not just two board members. And it was a surprisingly short paper. I think this is a much more preliminary paper than most of the papers that I've been doing this semester that I've been looking at from the WFA conference. And putting on my referee hat, like there are causality concerns here. It's always hard to publish when you don't have um, a good source of causality. The data is pretty novel here, like solid evidence that there was actual collusion between and it's a large number of companies too, not just like an individual case study. I I think that's pretty rare. So that's going to definitely help their case with this paper. But you know, it's hard to really be confident that this is really causing the collusion because again, we don't have a random. There's no randomization of are these companies sharing leadership or not. And that's just a real. I don't see a way for this paper to avoid that problem, and it'll probably hurt this paper. But even so, it was very interesting to see that correlation. I mean, I think that correlation is very interesting to for us to see that yes, it is actually more likely. We don't know why it's more likely, but we have pretty solid evidence now that yes, collusion of at least this particular type of form was indeed happening more often when companies shared leadership, and it's even if the company already was interested in doing collusion because they had collusion. Every company here, whether they actually did the collusion with their peer or they didn't, had a collusion agreement with someone else. So that is all for this week's paper. And if you enjoyed, please comment, like, and or subscribe so others can find this video too. And I'll see you all next week with, again, more papers from WFA. We've got at least 3 or 4 more to go.